Vishnabel Loroviki joyfully declares herself the one and only imperial princess of the nation. She then remembers her horrific past execution, where she was torn apart by bulls. Inexplicably, she finds herself alive again, sitting in the death row waiting chamber. Realizing she's returned to the past, Vishnabel correctly predicts the executioner will appear in 3 seconds. The countdown continues as a uniformed man consults his pocket watch. When the door opens, she throws a tantrum on the floor, screaming that she doesn't want to go. While flailing against the guards, she questions why she returned to the worst possible moment, right before her execution. Complaining that regressions should provide more time, she suddenly has a horrifying thought. Facing the prospect of being dismembered again, she desperately prays to her ancestor, the god of Kisomalos. As the rope tightens on her wrist, she continues her prayer, admitting she has neglected the ancestral rites. Suspended by ropes, she makes a final plea for her ancestral god to appear and save her. Her prayer is answered as God Kisomalos, the family's ancestral deity, appears and greets his descendant. Enraged, Vishnabel welcomes him with a powerful princess uppercut, shouting that he finally arrived. She continues to pummel the surprised deity with a furious barrage of blows. Beaten and shaken, Kisomalos surrenders and begs her to listen to his explanation. They suddenly appear seated at a table, where she grants him a chance to speak, telling him to spit it out. Kisomalos looks completely flustered and bewildered by the sudden interrogation. Pow! She punches him again as he internally blames the loss on his weakened divine power. Vishnabel angrily clenches her fist, demanding to know why his divine power has weakened. The deity looks nervous, placing a hand over his heart as she glares at him. She furiously dismisses his unheard explanation, shouting about its trash logic. Kisomalos explains that for the family's divine power to grow, descendants must live just as their deity once did. He reveals that if they stray from his path, the family falls to ruin, concluding she should have lived recklessly. A flashback shows his reckless behavior, leaving Vishnabel to stare at the unbelievable truth. Horrified, she realizes that to gain power, she needed to be reckless, meaning her entire diligent life was wrong. She laments her diligent past, crying that she was forced to live that way. The reason for her strict life is revealed to be her biological father, the emperor. Her father is described as the worst emperor in the 500-year history of the Kisomalos dynasty. As a puppet emperor, he cared only for money, even selling the chancellor position for a pouch of gold. His personal life was just as corrupt, with 28 official mistresses and countless illegitimate children. His biggest flaw was being a complete dimwit, unable to understand even basic reports from an aide. He casually dismissed important documents and failed to cultivate any useful political alliances. His negligence empowered corrupt officials, who celebrated their freedom to evade taxes and abuse their power. Eventually, her father was executed by guillotine, a fate she admits she thought he deserved. However, things changed when a mysterious Grand Duke appeared and sentenced her to dismemberment as well. She fumes that she would have accepted a quick death by poison or the guillotine. This brutal punishment was especially cruel to her, who had fought so hard to save the nation. The Grand Duke had accused her of standing by idly while her father disgraced the empire. For her supposed insolence, he sentenced her to the brutal execution of dismemberment. Enraged at the memory, she screams back at the Grand Duke, calling him a bastard. Wah! She tearfully retorts that the imperial finances only survived because of her hard work. She recalls studying imperial governance as a lonely child while others played outside. In another memory, she trains fiercely in self-defense, rolling through the grass. After working herself to exhaustion for her father, she was dragged away by the Grand Duke, all because she hadn't lived recklessly. Kisomalos looks on as a defeated. Vishnabel sadly concludes her life was lived in vain. Her fighting spirit returns as she snaps that she's already dead, so pulling herself together is pointless. Kisomalos panics, desperately trying to tell her that something grave has occurred. She furiously throttles him, screaming that nothing could be graver than the death of the last legitimate heir. As she strangles him, the sound of a ticking clock catches her attention, and she pauses in confusion. Looking down at the deity in her arms, she suddenly asks about borrowed divine power. Kisamalos explains he was short on divine power to turn back time, so he borrowed some from a clock-faced deity. Without a word, Vishnubal furiously flings him across the room. The clock-faced deity appears, warning that she must repay the borrowed divine power when she returns to the present day. Vishnubal angrily argues that an heir is only a fool because her house deity is a fool. He laughs dismissively, questioning the nonsense she's spouting. The clock deity explains he sent her back 16 years, prompting Vishnubal to demand an explanation. Kisamalos joyfully sings that it's because youth blooms at 18, earning a look of utter disgust from Vishnubal. The clock deity apologizes for a complication. She has to die one more time before regressing, horrifying her with the thought of another dismemberment. Back on the execution platform, she is once again bound by ropes, lamenting her deity's incompetence. As she screams in terror, Kisamalos gives a cheerful peace sign from the heavens. Resigned to her fate, she admits her diligent life was lived in vain. The scene transitions, showing her younger self in a brightly lit room. She makes a firm resolution for her new life. She will live recklessly. The regression is complete, showing her as Vishnubal Loroi Kisamalos at 5 years old. As a young child, she sits with a pout, declaring herself the sole princess of the empire. She reflects on the bizarre situation, dismembered for a second time, only to regress to age 5. In this world, a family's divine power and status determine their prosperity for generations to come. Vishnubal throws a tantrum, finding it ridiculous that her father could ruin their family in a single generation. Noticing her words are slurred, she's interrupted by 3 maids rushing to her side. A maid brings a bowl of water, which Vishnubal thinks is perfect for cooling down. She dips her finger into the bowl, contemplating her next move. Pwack! In a sudden outburst, she splashes the water directly in the maid's face. She shrieks with childish fury, accusing someone of trying to poison her. The maids are thrown into a state of utter panic. Rushing to her, they urge her to drink an antidote to cure the paralysis in her tongue. Another maid angrily agrees, blaming a venomous woman for the princess's state. A third maid tries to calm her by offering her favorite strawberry candies as a treat. Her eyes widen in shock as she suddenly recognizes this exact moment from her past. She recalls one of her father's lovers poisoning her with a paralysis potion, an act for which the woman was beheaded. The paralysis lasted 2 years, forcing her to speak like an idiot through all her lessons. Exhausted by the memory, she finally relents and agrees to take the medicine. The maids express their relief, revealing they prepared an extra dose just in case. One maid praises her as a wise future ruler, a sentiment with which Vishnubal silently agrees. As a maid offers the medicine, Vishnubal attempts to say her name, slurring out M-E-Y. Deeply moved, the maid tearfully declares that from this day forward, her name is Emily. Vishnubal asks for the date, and Emily confirms it is the 3rd day of the 11th month, year 8173. She calculates that this is precisely 16 years before her dismemberment, just as Kisamalos had said. Having learned what she needs, she waves her hand to dismiss the maids. Alone now, she sits and chews her finger thoughtfully. She realizes with dawning horror that if she can't repay the divine power, she'll be dismembered for every bit of the debt. Her focus narrows to a single critical question: how to raise his divine status. She recalls Kisamalos' words, realizing she must live recklessly, like a piece of trash. However, she refuses to be a simple moron like her father, believing there must be a hidden method. She deduces that Kisamalos' power grew because he gathered talented people around him, despite his reckless life. Having found her answer, she flops onto her bed with a sense of purpose. A brilliant plan begins to form as she smiles and holds up a single, polished fingernail. Her adorable paw-printed slippers tap across the floor as she begins her mission. Now in a fancy blue dress, she leads her maids through the palace, heading for the royal regent. Dressed in a fine blue dress, Vishnubal marches down the hall, announcing her intent to fire all of her tutors. With the determined clench of her fist, she fully commits to her new, reckless path. Vishnabel declares her new delinquent lifestyle will involve wearing whatever she wants and wandering around. Her eyes widen in a sudden, ecstatic gasp. Ta-da! She beholds the giant elephant slide she had always dreamed of riding. As Vishnabel sprints towards the slide, Emily chases after her, desperately yelling that it's dangerous. Whoosh! She zips down the slide with pure joy, reassuring Emily she's fine, while Emily panics at the incredible speed. Thump! She is launched from the end of the slide, landing hard at the bottom. Thwack! She tumbles onto the grass in a heap, but seems completely unfazed. With a radiant smile, she announces that this is incredibly fun. Climbing back up the ladder, she marvels at the joy she's been missing all her life. Determined, she vows to ride the slide every single day to make up for all the fun she missed. Suddenly, an unseen voice commands her to get down from there. A small boy appears with his maids, angrily stating his daddy bought the slide for him, which confuses Vishnabel. The boy, introduced as the emperor's illegitimate child Trinity, threatens her by boasting that his father is the emperor. Vishnabel, her speech impaired by paralysis, defiantly tries to ask who he thinks she is. She internally fumes after biting her tongue, desperate for the paralysis to finally wear off. Trinity furiously shakes the ladder, screaming for her to get down immediately. Vishnabel angrily calls him a CWAZYBWAT and tells him to wait as she points down at him. With a determined grin, she launches herself down the slide once more. Yelling, "Big thing," she soars through the air, aimed directly at Trinity. Pow! She collides headfirst with Trinity, furiously claiming the slide as her own. While the maids scream for the princess, Vishnabel tackles Trinity, calling him an insolent brat and yelling for him to die. Now sitting in a prison cell, Vishnabel fumes, realizing that moron landed her in a political prison camp. A fiery chibi version of her screams in absolute rage, the sound echoing through the stone walls. In another cell, a man with long black hair looks up from his book, intrigued by the sound. He looks pensive, wondering why a child's voice is coming from inside the prison. A guard carries the struggling princess into her cell as she internally complains about being locked up by that blockhead. In a flashback, she gleefully points at a crying Trinity, declaring she won because he cried first. She recalls Trinity's claim to all the playground rides and vents about the unfairness of it all. Back in her cell, she screams about how unfair it is and how much she hates prison. The guard warns her that continued disturbances will enrage the emperor, but she dismissively calls her father a blockhead. Now holding a microphone, Vishnabel puts on a concert, passionately screaming that she hates prison and wants out. Bang! A powerful blast of energy erupts from her as she screams into the microphone. Staring in disbelief at a fresh hole in the wall, she wonders if her voice was really that loud. The man in the next cell remarks that this is no place for a child and asks why she's imprisoned. Vishnabel peeks through the hole and cheerfully announces, "I hit someone." He asks who. The man smirks, realizing he's speaking to the princess. As she stumbles to the floor, he coolly remarks that her lisp makes her difficult to understand. Infuriated, she demands to know how he dares put himself on her level before doing a quick mic check. He calmly apologizes for his rudeness and asks for her pity, which she grants with a huff. He then turns to the important question: why did she hit the prince? Vishnabel recounts her story of finding the slide, only for the 4-star brat to claim it was his. She defiantly crosses her arms, refusing to argue with the so-called rightful heir. The man expresses concern that such a spoiled brat will become emperor, earning a sharp "how dare you" from Vishnabel. She stomps her foot on the ground, in a fit of pique. Stroking his beard, the man concludes with a smirk that as long as she won, that's what matters. He observes that her presence makes sense, as this prison holds powerful individuals who oppose the emperor. He deduces that Trinity must have powerful family backing to have been imprisoned instead of executed for defying a royal. Vishnabel laughs with delight, realizing she's found a valuable ally just in the nick of time. She flops onto the floor, exasperated by her father's actions, while the man's voice dryly suggests her father has a brain. Her thoughts are interrupted as an unseen voice calls out, "Your Highness, the princess." A guard appears at her cell door, announcing that the emperor summons her. Patting down her dress, Vishnabel coolly agrees to go. The man in the next cell asks if she's leaving, and she retorts that an imperial heir can't stay in prison long. She pauses for a moment, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. He asks her to wait and to bring someone named Himang with her. Winking cheerfully, she promises to try and secure his release, proclaiming herself a splendid princess. Walking down the hall, she fumes that she's been summoned to the Empress's palace, which has no mistress. Standing before the grand doors, a new guard confirms that the empire currently has no empress. A flashback reveals her mother, the last empress, who attempted a double suicide by fire with the emperor. The memory concludes with the tragic fact that her mother was the only one who died in the fire. The flashback shows the emperor covered in bandages, having suffered severe burns that left him unable to eat meat for half a year. Due to the severe trauma, the emperor never remarried, leaving the empress's seat vacant. She realizes the emperor has simply tossed the empress's palace to his mistress. As a guard ushers her inside, she scoffs at the lawless act, certain her ancestors are weeping. She enters to find the shirtless emperor, who calls her Bisha, while his mistress lounges in bed behind him. When the emperor asks for a greeting, Vishnabel offers a curt hello. Two maids forcefully pinch her cheeks, trying to make her behave. The emperor sternly asks if she really struck Trinity. Looking up from the floor, Vishnabel defiantly asks if her mother didn't also burn to death. Whack! The emperor furiously slaps her across the face. The force of the blow sends her reeling. He roars at her, forbidding her from ever speaking of that woman again. Stunned, Vishnabel wonders if her mother's spirit has returned, prompting her own boldness. He grabs her, yelling if she's trying to anger him, while she internally calls him a madman. The mistress languidly demands she apologize, infuriating Vishnabel, who refuses to bow to her. Screaming she'd rather be quartered, Vishnabel smashes a nearby teapot in defiance. Her small hand shatters the ceramic pot with surprising force. Holding a candle like a torch, she wildly declares that she is his mother now and dares him to test her. Enraged, the emperor calls her a mad wench and orders the guards to lock her back in the cell. She stands dejectedly, having been returned to the prison. Back in her cell, she glares at the wall as the man next door notes her swift return. She flops onto the floor, announcing that he should rejoice because she's staying, then demands he patch up her cheek. Surprised, he asks if she is hurt. She tearfully complains that the blockhead slapped her and she couldn't even land a princess uppercut. When she mentions he kicked her last time, the man's expression hardens as he asks her to repeat that. Ignoring him, she grabs her microphone and screams for a doctor. Crash! He punches clean through the stone wall, causing her to scream in shock. She stares at him, completely dumbfounded by his sudden display of strength. He reaches a hand through the hole, gently asking if she is all right. His hand remains outstretched as he repeats his concerned question. Startled, she stammers as his large hand approaches her face. He remarks that she looks like a fish-shaped pastry, leaving her utterly bewildered. Boom! With a single kick, he shatters the iron bars of her cell door. He calmly orders the guard to protect the princess and then departs. Vishnabel watches in utter confusion, unsure what just happened. She yells after him, furious that he tore her door off just to leave and is now leaving her in a draft. A doctor and the guard rush in, with the doctor anxiously asking if she's unharmed. Vishnabel furiously asks the doctor if she looks fine to him, causing him to beg for forgiveness. The doctor gently dabs her bruised cheek with a cotton swab. With her cheek bandaged, she decides to pass the time by reading some of the books in her cell. She realizes her neighbor is a lunatic reading a banned book titled Debates of the Witches' Republic, which explains his imprisonment. A large, muscular man suddenly appears behind her, startling her as he addresses her as Your Highness. He coolly informs her that he just went and beat up the emperor himself. Stunned, Vishnabel concludes he must have incredible family backing to still be alive. She internally compares him to a grizzly bear, thinking his voice sounds like a growl. She looks up at him and cautiously says a single word, Bumgora. He looks down and simply confirms with a glowing with authority. Vishnabel tells Bumgora to shave because he looks like an actual bear. Bumgora asks if she thought he beat the emperor on her behalf, but she retorts, asking if she ever requested such a thing. Covering his face, Bumgora sighs, enough, while Vishnabel smugly asks if he's ever heard of self-satisfaction. As she lectures about motivation and recognition, an unseen voice begs her to spare them the lecture. She playfully taps Bumgora, who is still covering his face in exasperation, telling him he needs to handle himself properly. She warns him that even if he wants to overthrow the emperor, he can't be careless about reading banned books. Announcing it's his bedtime, Bumgora tells her to play quietly now. He gently tucks her into bed, wishing her a good night's sleep as she rests peacefully. He stands over her for a moment, silently watching her sleep. Wah! The next morning, a newly dressed Vishnabel throws her food tray in a rage, screaming about being fed garbage. Two attendants panic, explaining that prison food is bland because the ration officer is stingy with salt. Surrounded by a magical aura of flowers, Vishnabel stands triumphantly in her new pink dress. The attendants bow deeply, praising her boundless generosity and promising to obey her command. She winks confidently, calling out for Bumgora. Bumgora appears, wryly throwing her own words back at her about self-satisfaction. He calls her an ungrateful brat as she sits with her arms crossed, pouting. An attendant brings Bumgora a proper meal, and he calmly accepts it while Vishnabel peeks at them. She cheekily plucks a large strawberry from his salad tray. Bumgora offers her the strawberry, explaining someone named Emery brought it, and she reluctantly thanks him. She recalls her Aunt Louise's advice that an heir shouldn't bow their head, and Bumgora recognizes the name. Surprised, she asks him how he knows Lorowi. Bumgora coldly reveals that Lorowi's family conspired with his uncle to murder his parents. Vishnabel apologizes for her aunt's extremism, but Bumgora dismisses it, saying his parents were weak. Confused, she scolds him for speaking ill of the dead. He recounts how his guardian uncle stole his inheritance and sent him to war, but he survived, returned, and annihilated his uncle's family to atone. He sits with a grim expression after finishing his tragic story. Vishnabel thoughtfully observes that he does have a conscience, and his messy beard proves he's been atoning for a while. While he returns his tray to an attendant, she tells him he's young and should try to enjoy life more. He turns back, calling out to Bumgora, and she looks up at him with purpose. She nervously asks him to give her his hand. He complies, allowing her small hand to take his. She begins a formal declaration, struggling to pronounce the names Kiso. He listens intently as she invokes the authority of the true bloodline of Kisamalos. Smiling radiantly, she holds his hand and appears to absolve him of his sins. He looks down at her as she tells him he is now free to live as he wishes. She declares his atonement is over and bluntly tells him to shave his beard. After she calls him a grizzly bear again, he looks down and quietly agrees. Holding his hand, she instructs him to show some proper manners the next time they meet. With a menacing grin, Bumgora accepts her proposal, leaving Vishnabel to wonder if he's just agreeing to be polite. Crash. In a sudden burst of action, he shatters the prison window with a single powerful kick. He lands gracefully outside the destroyed opening. As guards wish him safe travels, he sprints down the corridor, making his escape. Left behind, Vishnabel stares in stunned silence at the gaping hole in the wall. Vishnabel furiously shouts after the empty space where Bumgora just was, asking where he's going. A flashback shows that after Bumgora broke out, he violently kicked a guard out of his way. Sometime later, a cool Vishnabel in sunglasses is released, waving goodbye to the cheering guards. She realizes one of the Emperor's aides rushed her release to avoid public backlash. Alone in her room, Vishnabel renews her vow to kick the Emperor out of power soon. Back in her lavish room, she relaxes with a book and some snacks, looking utterly bored. Suddenly, something in her book catches her eye, and she gasps in surprise. She excitedly spots an advertisement for this month's hot item. squeaky duck shoes, and at a discount. A flashback reveals she was once jealous of another girl wearing them, and now she is determined to have a pair. Ring-a-ling. Wielding a broom, she frantically calls for her attendant, a woman named Emily. A maid appears, announcing with a hand over her heart that she is Emily for the day. Vishnubal excitedly holds up the catalog, ordering Emily to buy her the squeaky duck shoes. With fierce determination, Emily dashes off to fetch the shoes from a merchant as Vishnubal cheers. Vishnubal waits with a blush, eagerly anticipating trying on her new shoes. Her excitement is interrupted as a formidable woman with red hair appears in the doorway. The woman's expression is stern and disapproving as she glares into the room. With a furious expression, the woman bellows Vishnubal's nickname, Visha. Startled, Vishnubal recognizes the woman and hesitantly identifies her as Aunt Kazelnu. A title card introduces the woman as Kazelnu Leroy, head of House Leroy and the late Empress's sister. Vishnubal recalls how Kazelnu always screeched about dignity, even scolding her for simply yawning. In another memory, Kazelnu furiously shredded Vishnubal's love letters, ruining her budding romances. Kazelnu also forced her to learn embroidery, constantly comparing her to her perfect sister, Vishnubal's mother. Vishnubal narrates that her aunt's help only served to diminish her influence in the palace. Back in the present, Vishnubal wonders why Kazelnu is here when she should be at the battlefield. She fumes, realizing Kazelnu was absent and couldn't save her when she was threatened with execution. Kazelnu walks toward her, demanding to know what she did to get thrown in prison. Grab. She suddenly snatches Vishnubal's face, anxiously asking what happened to her cheek. Kazelnu laments that Vishnubal has the emperor's unlucky eyes, but then lists all her beautiful features that resemble her mother. Vishnubal flushes, thinking her aunt is being unnecessarily detailed with the compliments. Kazelnu whirls on a nearby maid, demanding a healing divine crystal for the heir's injury. An explanation follows, defining a divine crystal as an object containing crystallized divine power. These healing crystals are incredibly powerful, capable of reattaching a recently severed arm. A high god's crystal is so priceless that selling the entire princess's palace wouldn't cover the cost. Kazelnu insists on using one, declaring that she has money and will pay for it. Vishnubal bluntly points out that her aunt spent all her money on the war and is now a beggar. She continues, calling her aunt's clothes tacky and telling her to get married, causing Kazelnu to tremble in anger. Declaring Vishnubal's words too mean, Kazelnu launches a tickle attack as punishment, much to her niece's horror. Ouch! Vishnubal squirms as her aunt unleashes a flurry of ridiculously fast hand chops. Emily reappears, calling for the princess and holding something triumphantly above her head. She presents the squeaky duck shoes, proudly announcing she intercepted them on their way to Trinity. Vishnubal praises Emily for her good work, while a confused Kazelnu asks what the shoes are. Emily eagerly helps the excited princess put on her new shoes, telling her to wait just a moment. Squeak a squeeze up shows the adorable duck shoe making its signature sound. Trembling with joy, Vishnubal exclaims that they really do make a squeaky sound. She happily stomps around the room in her new shoes, surrounded by flowers and sparkles. She stops and gives a slight HMPH, looking back expectantly. Kazelnu struggles to lecture her about dignity, but is too flustered, which Vishnubal correctly interprets as her aunt finding her cute. Vishnubal strikes a confident pose and asks, "Cute, right?" prompting Kazelnu to hide her blushing face. Poofed, Emily turns away, trying her hardest to stifle a laugh. Vishnubal catches her, asking if she finds this amusing, causing Emily to drop to her knees in apology. With the other maids looking on in shock, Vishnubal announces she will personally administer the punishment, as Emily cries with gratitude. Vishnubal brightly declares that as a sign of repentance, Emily shall attend her bath today. Overcome with emotion, Emily prostrates herself on the floor, expressing her eternal gratitude to the princess. Kazelnu eagerly asks if she should wash her niece too, but Vishnubal flatly denies her entry into the bathroom. As two maids restrain her, Kazelnu throws a tantrum, screaming Vishnubal's name. Vishnubal watches her aunt's outburst with an unimpressed, pouty expression. Now, in her nightgown, Vishnabel happily sips a drink from a bunny-themed cup. She giggles with delight, sitting barefoot on her bed amidst a field of beautiful flowers. Vishnabel reflects on her good fortune. She got rid of her annoying aunt and acquired the latest squeaky shoes. A maid brings her a drink on a tray as Vishnabel declares that this is paradise on earth. Peeking from behind her bed, Vishnabel shouts in alarm, asking Emily why everyone is beaten to a pulp. Pointing an accusatory finger, Vishnabel demands to know if Emily is asking for a severe punishment as the maids cower. Emily explains that riffraff from the Empress's palace were acting up, so she taught them a lesson. Vishnabel realizes a mere concubine must be acting like the Empress for her handmaiden to dare fight the princess's ladies-in-waiting. She considers that if she lets this slide, her own position might be threatened. With sudden clarity, she decides she needs to find someone to fight the woman in her place. A brilliant idea strikes her, and she grins with mischievous excitement. Standing on a chair, Vishnabel commands Emily to prepare what she's about to tell her at once. A polished black shoe steps onto a stone path, signifying an important arrival. A man in an ornate fur-lined cape looks out over a sprawling palace, stating that he sees her. The man resolves to reach her, telling the kid to wait for him because he's on his way. As the sun sets over the palace, Emily narrates that she's going to camp out in front of the emperor's palace. Emily sits with Vishnabel and other maids at an outdoor table, determined to wait until the blockhead wakes up. 2 elegantly dressed women appear, announcing that the princess has summoned them. Vishnabel recalls a time before her regression when the emperor took a new mistress, diminishing another woman standing. She reveals that the new mistress was Count Brigitte's daughter and vows to attach a new lover to the blockhead today. She notes she hadn't expected the count's daughter to have a sister, but figures one of them will suit his taste. Her plan is to make small talk, then shove one of the women toward the emperor when he wakes up. She suddenly panics, realizing she has no idea what people talk about at tea time. A flashback shows her frantically studying, admitting she knows nothing of trends or gossip, while an attendant worries about a tea party. Seeing her own reflection in her teacup, she has a sudden idea about a topic for discussion. Addressing her guests as my friends, she slams the table and asks their opinion on attacking the Leroux's fortress. The 2 women are stunned, clarifying that she means the Medea Kingdom's military defense facility. Spotlighting a roasted chicken, one guest suggests poisoning the fortress's food supply to weaken their forces. Standing over a map with a model of the fortress, another woman questions how one could poison the food with such tight security. Wearing sunglasses, Vishnabel argues that contaminating the water supply would be far easier. The 2 guests, now in military uniforms, get fired up and begin to debate the next steps of the strategy. Vishnabel strikes a pose, agreeing that it's time to consider their next move. As night falls, an unseen speaker explains that the first thing to consider is timing. Vishnabel smugly presides over the discussion, as one of the women explains they must assume surprise attacks are forbidden. Looking utterly drained, one woman suggests they stop, while the other enthusiastically agrees her sister is right about everything. Vishnabel thinks they're pathetic for being exhausted, but resolves to continue since the emperor hasn't appeared yet. An authoritative voice from off-screen demands to know who dares make a ruckus in front of the emperor's palace. The emperor emerges, and Vishnabel thinks that the blockhead has finally arrived, urging him to take his future mistress. The 2 women quickly apologize to the emperor, begging him to quell his anger. The emperor turns his back to them, warning that because they've disturbed his rest, they will pay dearly. Trembling, the 2 women promise to obey whatever command he gives them. The emperor turns, charmingly offering his hand and deciding to hear their excuses before pulling both women into his arms. Watching from her seat, Vishnabel realizes with disdain that he's taking both of them as his mistresses. Looking up at the sky, she concludes with wide-eyed conviction that he's worse than a dog. Vishnabel reflects that by giving the emperor new mistresses, the previous woman's arrogance has finally subsided. She notes with satisfaction that the Brigitte sisters are keeping the emperor in check better than expected. Her mood sours as she remembers with absolute hatred that Christmas is approaching. An explanation reveals Christmas is the day when household gods or spirits select a worthy successor. This power follows a single heir succession, typically passing to the eldest legitimate child. Vishnubal worries that with her birthday next, she'll be paying off debts instead of receiving gifts due to a lord's depleted divine power. Suddenly, Kazelnu bursts into the room in a panic, shouting that it's an emergency. Before Vishnubal can react, her aunt snatches her up, leaving her to wonder what the fuss is about. Kazelnu quickly wraps Vishnubal in a cloak, telling her to cover her head and be silent. Realizing who is approaching, Kazelnu identifies the threat as Kiran, a name Vishnubal finds vaguely familiar. Peeking from her bundle, Vishnubal looks on with wide, curious eyes. She briefly imagines this is all an extravagant Christmas surprise from her aunt, who is dressed like Santa. The reality is far grimmer, as Kazelnu flees from a small, elite force that has infiltrated the palace. Delighted, Vishnubal thinks that if the intruders assassinate the emperor, it would be the best Christmas present ever. She peeks out again, soberly assessing that the intruders have no chance of survival with such a small force. A flashback highlights Kazelnu's reputation as the fearsome commander of the Imperial Guard. As Kazelnu tries to escape, a firm voice calls out her full name, Lady Kazelnu Leroy. A uniformed man appears before them, grabbing his collar and pleading for her to stop. Smirking, Kazelnu questions his nerve for daring to block her path. The man desperately warns Kazelnu that she will die if she leaves this place. Kazelnu coolly replies that he is mistaken. He is the one who is going to die. To her shock, the man becomes ecstatic, excitedly agreeing that he will be the one to die. Confused, Kazelnu listens as he clarifies that Duke Kiran doesn't want to harm the princess and asks her to come with them. He clutches his uniform, desperately pleading for her to comply. He rips open his coat, revealing a vest strapped with dynamite and declaring himself the insane explosion divine general. Both Kazelnu and a horrified Vishnubal scream as Kazelnu calls him a crazy bastard. Sniff, sniff. The general begins to cry, swearing on his life that his threat is sincere. Wah! He breaks down, complaining that his superior, Ende, will get him killed with his outrageous demands. Sighing, Vishnubal decides to cooperate, telling her aunt to put her down so they can go. Once on her feet, the general looks at her and oddly asks if Ende killed all his family. Vishnubal and a stunned Kazelnu stare in disbelief, unsure how to respond to such a question. The general cheerfully dismisses his own question, saying his family deserved it, giving Vishnubal an unsettling feeling of déjà vu. Deciding to move things along, Vishnubal takes the general's hand and tells him to lead the way. He steals his resolve, thinking he needs to see the face of that bastard Ende. In another location, a man identified as Ende sits on a throne as Vishnubal rests her head in his lap. The general leads Kazelnu and Vishnubal to the entrance of a dilapidated palace, announcing their arrival. Vishnubal points an accusatory finger into the throne room, shouting at the cursed fools for daring to sit on the throne. Ende greets her coolly, commenting on her weight gain, prompting her to furiously retort that she's normal. She throws a tantrum on the floor, screaming at him while he wonders where she learned to speak so crudely. Kazelnu erupts in a rage, grabbing Vishnubal and threatening everyone, leading Ende to conclude that she is the problem. Ende announces he will follow Vishnubal's choice, while the emperor at his feet desperately begs her to choose him, her father. Vishnubal demands they explain themselves, thinking they are all self-pitying fools for acting without her. A gloved hand extends as Ende states they are giving the princess the choice. He declares that if she chooses him, he will protect her until adulthood. If not, he will commit suicide. The general interjects that the explanation is lacking and offers to clarify, as Ende is naturally like that. Using a chalkboard diagram, the general explains that his superior, Ende Kiran, escaped a prison camp and now wants to be her father. He continues the lesson, stating that the whole operation will be decided by the princess's choice of a father. He panics, realizing that if she chooses neither, he will have to self-destruct with the emperor. Kazelnu immediately shuts down the idea of Vishnubal ruling, and the general agrees she can't handle politics. Vishnabel glares, shocked that her aunt would call her incapable in front of everyone. Vishnabel eyes Ende suspiciously, wondering if he is the culprit she's been looking for. Ende looks back in confusion, asking what on earth she could have been thinking until this moment. Flustered, Vishnabel argues that first impressions matter and she can't be expected to recognize someone so audacious. With a powerful kick, Ende sends the Emperor flying and reminds him that his cousin possesses explosive divine authority. Tapping her head with a sigh, Vishnabel calls Ende a crazy person for his reckless actions. Ende casually remarks that he hears that often, prompting her to think that it's not a compliment. Taking charge, Vishnabel tells Ende to follow her so they can talk, and he calmly agrees. While the Emperor struggles and pleads that he's her father, Vishnabel coolly dismisses him as being all bark and no bite. Ende and Vishnabel walk toward a grand doorway, leaving the defeated Emperor behind them. After hopping onto the throne, Vishnabel commands Ende to kneel before her and he readily obeys. Now seated on the throne, Vishnabel looks down with a newfound sense of authority. Kneeling, Ende asks why he's doing this, prompting her to silently urge him to think about it. Vishnabel throws a tantrum, screaming at Ende about his plan to die if she gets involved with him. Ende reveals he has returned to this place by traveling back 16 years in time, leaving Vishnabel stunned. He leans in, questioning whether she really expects the princess to believe his fantastic story. Horrified, Vishnabel realizes the implication and asks if he also traveled through time. Ende smirks with satisfaction, confirming her suspicion by saying he knew it would be like this. Panicked, Vishnabel quickly claims it was a slip of the tongue and fabricates a story about seeing Chiron, their family's deity, in a dream. Ende recalls that after helping Kisamalos turn back time, Chiron was demoted to a low-level god, concluding Kisamalos couldn't have been fine. Vishnabel hesitates, thinking that this is someone else's family problem. Her eyes widen as a shocking possibility suddenly dawns on her. Ende explains Chiron's warning. If he isn't restored in 16 years, someone else will bear the karma, and he pointedly asks about her. He grimaces, revealing that for him the time loop means his torture will repeat infinitely. With a look of understanding, Vishnabel turns her full attention to the kneeling Ende. She smiles sweetly, coyly, asking if they might have met somewhere other than their shared prison. Ende observes that she acts like a cub but perceives things like a ghost, to which she retorts that the line is hers. Looking troubled, Ende admits he has no memories of time traveling himself, but Chiron told him otherwise. He confesses that his wrong judgment led to the execution of Kisomalos's last heir, and Vishnabel celebrates his admission of guilt. She furiously launches herself at Ende, demanding to know if he understands how much it hurt. He quietly apologizes. He offers to raise her properly and support her in regaining her power if she'll bet her life on him. While pulling his hair, Vishnabel demands he stop hesitating and reveal the true reason for his offer. Ende acknowledges her perceptiveness and reveals the truth. The Chiron family's divine power only manifests when a child is raised properly. Enraged, she realizes he intends to use her, but he counters that no one in the world understands her better than him. She bites down on his shoulder in frustration while he admits her deduction is somewhat true but vexing. He asks if she needs the bathroom, prompting her to pull his hair and furiously tell the fool not to hold it in. After a sigh, she decides choosing Ende is the far better option and begins to weigh the reasons. She pokes his chest, cursing his audacious face, and he sarcastically thanks her for her kind assessment. Declaring it wasn't a compliment, she tells the culprit it's time to go, and he agrees. As they depart, Vishnabel cheerfully announces, "We're out," leaving the general watching in surprise. Kazelnu greets them, happily asking Vishnabel if her important conversation went well. Vishnabel pats the empty seat next to the throne, instructing Ende to sit down there. She stands over the seated Ende, preparing to make her final declaration. Her hand glows with power as she formally commands him to kneel. Placing her hand upon his bowing head, Vishnabel officially appoints Ende as her father. As he smiles, she commands him to raise her properly and well. Ende obediently kneels, pledging to follow her orders completely. Now held by Ende, she reflects that by her command, he has become her guardian and will one day fulfill his promise to return the throne to Kisamalos. Ende holds a beaming Vishnubal, his new duty now clear. His solemn pledge echoes, he will return the throne to Kisamalos. Ende proudly holds a beaming Vishnubal, marking the start of their new life together. The deposed emperor is bound and dragged away, screaming Visha's name as he's transferred to the detached palace. As the emperor's cries for Visha fade, Ende holds a pouting Vishnubal, who thinks her former father is too thick-headed to understand why this is happening. Ende reminds the princess their journey isn't over, but she pats his chest, retorting that he shouldn't take her for a fool, big oaf. Ende insists he is now father, and Vishnubal retorts that she is Visha, demanding he hurry and make the official declaration. A well-dressed man, standing beside a woman with red hair, begins a formal announcement, citing the date as the year 8173 of Narak reckoning. As Vishnubal smiles, the proclamation continues, declaring Ende Kiran the new emperor and heralding the first year of his reign. Ende raises his arm in triumph, lifting a joyous Vishnubal before the court as its new ruler. Wah! A roar of acclamation thunders through the hall. The grand, gilded throne room stands ready for a new era. A hand signs a royal decree, formally recognizing the sole heir, Vishnubal Luroi Kisamalos. The signed decree condemns the former emperor, Helkatra Mayuna Kisamalos, for his crimes and sentences him to execution, establishing Ende Kiran as the new emperor. Sitting on the throne with Ende, Vishnubal quietly plans to have the raid recorded as her idea, a way to protect her new father while also having leverage over him. A knight informs Ende that the chief ministers have arrived, and Vishnubal coolly orders them to be brought in. The gathered ministers, led by a man with a prominent mustache, stare in absolute horror at the scene before them. The minister with the mustache gasps in disbelief, recognizing Ende as a mage by the name of the god Kisamalos. From the throne, an authoritative voice commands the ministers to listen well. The voice offers the cowering ministers safety if they don't resist, then challenges any who oppose the ascension to raise their hands immediately. Ende glares menacingly, threatening to kill any dissenters on the spot. The mustached minister nervously questions why the princess is present for this. Ende states that Visha has a decision to make, which she confirms, correcting him to use her name. He announces that Visha will decide the method and date of the former emperor's execution, shocking the assembled nobles. With a fiery glint in her eyes, Vishnubal shouts her one-word decision, burning. Enveloped in illusory flames, Vishnubal explains her mother was burned alive, so this is simply an act of filial piety, horrifying the court who call her a daughter of flames. TSK. An elderly noblewoman in the background mutters that Vishnubal is a ruthless wench. The same woman sighs, feigning reverence as she thinks that she could never utter such foul words to the princess. Vishnubal smiles sweetly at the elderly woman, warning her that she heard her backtalk and will remember it for 30 years. Ende quietly asks Visha if he should kill the woman, but she advises against it, calling her father off by stating the old woman is too useful. Ende nods in agreement, and Vishnubal expresses her satisfaction with a happy good. Vishnubal recalls their discussion about being bound by fate, reaffirming it with an affectionate, yes, big oaf. With determined expressions, they prepare to face their shared future together. As Vishnubal sleeps, distant voices praise the air, and she groggily complains about the noise waking her. A voice congratulates her for winning over Kiran, and her eyes snap open in recognition. A divine-looking man with blonde hair suddenly appears, causing a startled Vishnubal to scream. He reveals that her new bond with Kiran has restored some of his divine power, allowing him to manifest beside her. Awestruck, Vishnubal asks if he is truly Lord Kisamalos, who confirms it's not a dream, calling her a fool. Kisamalos stands with his hands on his hips, looking mildly exasperated. He appears flustered after Vishnubal admits she didn't know how to react, having never received a message from an ancestor god. Vishnubal questions his explanation, confused because she thought her divine power would return just from her living recklessly. Kisamalos clarifies that actively gathering allies is also essential to building divine power quickly. Taking his words to heart, Vishnubal wonders if getting 100 fathers would work, much to her own dismay. A tiny, exasperated Kisomalos despairs, lamenting that all his heirs are blockheads. Sighing, Kisomalos raises a finger to correct her misunderstanding. He explains that other bonds, like the devotion of vassals and the trust of the people, are also crucial. Making a heart shape with his hands, he emphasizes the importance of love and connection. Kisomalos explains the realm fell because she received no love, and Vishnubel raises her hand like a student, saying she understands. He prepares to reveal the absolute fastest way to build divine power. He declares the secret is to take 100 lovers, prompting Vishnubel to furiously call him a jerk. She adamantly refuses, declaring she'll have only one husband. But Kisomalos thinks that's not how fate works for people like them. Kisomalos recalls his promiscuous ancestors, but explains that seeing his own parents meet made him swear off that life. Vishnubel furiously stomps her foot, shouting that she refuses and questioning how anyone could live with 100 lovers. Kisomalos offers the irresponsible advice that saying, "I love you," doesn't require taking responsibility, earning a furious jerk from Vishnubel. Pointing an accusatory finger at the posing god, Vishnubel furiously declares that he's absolute garbage. As Kisomalos' words devolve into sheep-like bleating, a confused Vishnubel wonders why he's suddenly making that sound. As Kisomalos fades away while bleeding, a frantic Vishnubel yells after him, demanding he explain himself before leaving. Her desperate cry for Lord Kisomalos echoes into the void as her vision ends. The scene transitions back to the waking world, focusing on a sunlit palace window. Lying in her bed, Vishnubel lets out a long, weary sigh. She stares up at the ceiling, still processing the strange encounter from her dream. Now dressed in a warm pink coat, Vishnubel steps outside with a maid to begin the day. The palace atmosphere is uneasy after the coup, with increased guards assigned to the princess's residence. A knight with a prominent scar approaches with concern after hearing a cough, and Vishnubel observes that he's a new face. He smiles proudly, placing a hand over his heart as he introduces himself and his men as knights of House Kiran. He explains that forces loyal to the deposed emperor are attacking the palace, and they are there to guarantee her safety. She pats his arm in appreciation of his efforts, which he declares is an honor. The knight looks confused, asking how a vulgar sheep gained their attention, before defending Ende as peculiar but not ill-hearted. A golden lamb appears, bleating loudly and crying, as a distant voice complains about the unbearable noise. The maid smiles, pointing out to the knight that the golden sheep is the symbol of the Kisomalos family. A brilliantly smiling Vishnubel realizes this is a great opportunity to frame the sheep's appearance as a good omen for Kiran's reign. Taking the omen badly, one of the knights draws his sword, hysterically vowing to wash away his sins with his own life. Vishnubel waves dismissively, claiming it was just a joke, before cheerfully suggesting they all eat lamb for lunch. She points, ordering a soldier to catch the sheep and telling a maid named Emiri to fetch the master cook. As the knight ropes the sheep, Vishnubel coolly thinks that the animal was going to die anyway for waking her up. The knight presents the captured, struggling sheep to Vishnubel, who eagerly tells him to bring it closer. Emiri returns with the imperial princess's exclusive head chef, who appears incredibly nervous. Tugging on the sheep's rope, Vishnubel happily announces that they will have a full lamb menu for breakfast. The master cook respectfully objects, explaining that the sheep is unfortunately far too old to be eaten. Vishnubel reconsiders, admitting to herself that eating an animal symbolic of the imperial family would be a bit strange. Deciding against it, she hands the rope to the knight and orders him to take the sheep far away. As the knight carries the sheep off, Vishnubel muses that villagers will just catch and slaughter it anyway, before realizing she's hungry. Just as she prepares to ask the cook for breakfast, a woman with bright red hair appears, joyfully shouting, "Bisha!" The woman proposes breakfast and an etiquette review, but an annoyed Vishnubel thinks her aunt should eat at her own house. To provoke her aunt, Vishnubel defiantly announces she's going to the dining hall to dip rolls in her soup. The aunt scolds her for forgetting her manners, but Vishnubel retorts that bullies live however they want. Her aunt argues that Visha's mother had perfect manners at her age and was never a blockhead, Vishnabel cheerfully suggests her aunt should go live with her mother in the imperial mausoleum, leaving the woman speechless. As punishment, her aunt grabs the struggling Vishnabel and covers her in kisses while laughing manically. A messenger runs up, laughing as he reports an urgent message from Emperor Kiran about a major problem, confusing Vishnabel with his cheerfulness. He explains he's laughing because he's never seen Ende look so furious, while demanding the princess be brought to him immediately. The messenger reveals that a woman from the empress's quarters tried and failed to attack Ende. Learning the woman had been using the ex-emperor's bedroom, a disgusted Vishnabel thinks she must have a stomach of steel. Her aunt and the messenger find the situation hilarious, and the aunt decides she'll give the captured woman some advice on court life. The group sets off excitedly, with the aunt declaring she wants to see the wrinkled face of that vulgar. They arrive to find Ende sitting on a bed, staring down at a woman with pink hair, bound and kneeling before him. As she enters the room, Vishnabel immediately recoils, covering her nose from the strong smell of cigarettes. Ende extinguishes his cigarette on the bed linen while contemplating the woman's punishment, a move Vishnabel finds surprisingly badass. He crosses his arms, and Vishnabel mentally refocuses, acknowledging that his coolness isn't the most important thing right now. Vishnabel recalls palace law, which states that while the woman would be returned to her family, any illegitimate children must be killed. Staring at a strange glow emanating from the captured woman, Vishnabel has a sudden, shocking realization about the situation. The captured woman furiously screams that the emperor is an impotent bastard, as Vishnabel mentally notes that isn't the case. Overhearing the insult, the messenger collapses in a fit of laughter. Ende looks annoyed, wondering how his sister-in-law Loroi raised a child who knows the word impotent. Loroi defensively claims she only said the word in front of Visha about 20 times, earning a silent thanks for the confession from her niece. The messenger clarifies that Ende isn't impotent, just inhumanly detached, prompting Visha to wonder what kind of being he is. Confused by her question, the messenger wonders if she means an animal like a chimpanzee or a panda. He gives a cheerful thumbs up, assuring her that people will understand Ende eventually, but Visha secretly hopes she never does. Visha declares that due to her low status, the woman can only be a mistress, and any of her potential offspring must be eliminated. The woman, Tremorsi, frantically pleads her innocence, claiming Your Imperial Highness has it all wrong, and she would never betray him. With a smile, Loroi suggests they could just castrate the traitor and let him go, which Tremuti screams is no different from killing him. A memory surfaces of a voice telling a woman named Sarah that survival is the most important thing. Ende orders his guards to remove Tremorti as Visha decreed, and she is dragged away screaming insults. As she is taken, Tremuti curses the entire Kisamalos family, leaving Visha to wonder why she's their only target. The messenger advises Visha to ignore the foul language, and she calmly agrees. Ahem, you? Laughing, Loroi pats his shoulder, admitting she's starting to like him for listening to Visha, but Ende clarifies he wasn't trying to please her. As Ende walks away, Loroi mutters about the stubbornness of Loroi heads. Visha interrupts, telling her aunt that Bungo doesn't like the Loroi. Confused, Loroi asks when they ever fought, leading Visha to speculate it must have been an ancestral grudge. Visha connects the dots, realizing her maternal grandmother was behind a plot against Kiran, despite their families having no known contact. She questions the motive behind her grandmother's desire to eliminate Kiran as a vision of their ancestors appears. The scene shifts to an opulent balcony where Ende invites Visha and Loroi to sit for a meal. The sounds of distant screams fill the air as narration explains that the captured pro-emperor faction is being executed. Unfazed, Visha calmly eats her soup, earning a comment about her remarkably strong stomach. Ende holds up a newspaper and makes a one-sided announcement. He is changing Vishunahel's tutor. Loroi furiously objects, but Ende asserts his authority as emperor and Visha's official father, much to her exasperation. While Visha cringes with embarrassment, Ende notes that the former chief chamberlain was quite enthusiastic about the new tutor. Her fort clatters as Ende announces that classes will begin tomorrow, and Visha's thoughts turn to the chamberlain. She is horrified to see the new tutor is the strict elderly woman who manages all the palace servants. Visha despairs, thinking the old woman is a terrible teacher, while Ende knowingly remarks that it begins again. Ende informs them that, by his proposal, Visha's lessons will now cover imperial studies, economics, and philosophy. Lorowi protests that Visha can barely read, but Ende is ready with a counter-argument. He cleverly asks how a child who supposedly can't read could have understood Martin's Republican dialogue, catching Visha off guard. Panicked by her slip-up, Visha resolves to study hard to avoid both the strict new tutor and her own tendency to slack off. A bright light shines, signaling a singular idea. With a quick motion, Visha prepares her new strategy. Winking playfully, she decides her best course of action is to simply pretend to be dumb. Ende dismisses her act and prepares to leave, prompting Visha to launch into a childish plea for him to catch a butterfly. As Visha throws a tantrum, Ende grabs her and demands she listen, but she feigns deafness. Taking note of the blocked ears, Ende punishes Lorowi instead, banning her from the princess's palace for a week. He turns to leave as Visha defiantly screams that she won't attend Visha's class. Clinging desperately to Ende's leg, Visha wails that she hates studying and calls out for Bumgora and Daddy. Now dressed in his full imperial attire, Ende announces his first day as emperor, with Visha still attached to his leg, screaming about her hatred for studying. As he officially begins his duties, Visha collapses to the floor, resuming her tantrum about catching a butterfly. While an official attempts to deliver a report, Visha thrashes on the floor, yelling that she hates her studies. The nervous official tries to proceed with his report, as the princess continues her dramatic tantrum at his feet. Visha's cries for a butterfly echo through the hall as she continues to roll on the floor. A small, worried mascot character appears, gently reminding the audience where to read the chapter. After an exhausting day of tantrums, Visha sleeps soundly, snoring gently. Visha wakes up in bed with a start, coughing weakly. She looks around the opulent room in confusion, realizing she's back in her chambers despite last being in the audience hall. Remembering she fell asleep during her protest, she panics, realizing Ende never canceled her classes. With a furious scream, she blames everyone for tiring her out, imagining Ende giving her a dismissive thumbs down. A voice calls out, "Princess," and Visha immediately stops her tantrum to see who it is. An attendant with red hair enters, presenting a glass terrarium and explaining that the emperor ordered him to deliver it. Visha pouts, resentfully thinking Ende is trying to appease her with a gift after forcing classes on her. Her eyes widen in genuine surprise as she gets a closer look at the gift. Inside the terrarium, a beautiful blue butterfly flutters over a bed of white flowers. The attendant explains that Ende caught it himself in the palace greenhouse, as it's the only place a butterfly could be found this season. Recalling Ende leaving to attend to personal business during her tantrum, Visha realizes this was what he was doing. Completely charmed, Visha clutches the gift with hearts in her eyes, wondering if this makes up for everything. As the attendant offers to report her delight to the emperor, Visha eagerly turns to a maid beside her. She leaps with excitement, ordering a maid named Emiria to bring her colored paper and a pen. Visha lies on her bed, carefully writing a message. Her finished note, decorated with origami, thanks Ende for the butterfly, but cheekily asks him to cancel her classes. She hands the letter to a servant, ordering him to deliver it to the emperor immediately. Emiria admires the butterfly and suggests placing it near Visha's bed so she can see it often. Visha puts a finger to her chin, thoughtfully considering the suggestion. She dismisses the idea, suddenly declaring the butterfly is gross, up close, and must be released so it won't feel trapped. As Visha announces she's going to ride her bicycle, Emiria smiles warmly. Other maids present Visha with a new duck plushie, delighting her as they reflect on how she's finally acting like a child. Emiria recalls how Visha used to suppress her desire to play, instead forcing herself to study relentlessly at her desk. A memory shows Visha rejecting a teddy bear, always choosing her studies and dignity over simple joys. The maids could only watch her pitifully, unable to interfere with the master's orders. Miria privately thinks that, above all else, she just wants the princess to be happy. Clenching her fist, she recalls that Visha not only lost her mother, but also had to endure a terrible incident in her past. The narration explains that the first head maid, Emily, was still alive when the princess was very young. Emily was the empress's most trusted confidant, always by her side. A younger Visha adored Emily, but a catastrophe was looming. Unfortunately, Emily's beauty caught the unwanted attention of the cruel former emperor. After the empress's tragic death, the situation worsened. The emperor summoned Emily to his chambers, and when she refused, he flew into a rage and had her brutally beaten. Emily's wounds from the savage beating eventually became infected. The first Emily died from her injuries, with a horrified young Visha witnessing her body being taken away. The devastating loss of her beloved nanny was a crushing blow to the young princess. Visha wept uncontrollably for 2 full days until she fainted, screaming Emily's name while Emiria tried to comfort her. Emiria holds the sobbing princess, desperately calling out to her. When Visha finally awoke, Emiria gently informed her that Emily's funeral had already passed. From the trauma, Visha's memory had fractured. She blankly asked who Emily was, having forgotten her completely. From that day forward, Visha began calling every maid in her service Emily as a coping mechanism. In the present, Visha rides her new bicycle with a smile while Emiria watches over her. Visha nearly collides with a servant and rudely shouts at him, prompting Emiria to worry about her increasingly coarse language. Emiria clenches her fist with renewed purpose, declaring that the Emily squad will devote themselves completely to serving the princess. The maids are shown engaging in intense physical training, throwing 100 gratitude punches for the princess each morning. Surrounded by a fearsome blue aura, the maids pledge their undying loyalty, their intensity startling onlookers. The intimidating Emily squad corners a terrified palace official demanding luxury goods from the treasury until he tearfully agrees. Striking a powerful pose, the maids vow to become an elite corps of ladies-in-waiting, fiercely loyal to their highness. Visha pedals happily on her bicycle, oblivious to her squad of supermaids running behind her with fiery determination. She lets out a laugh of pure, unadulterated joy. After a long day of playing, Visha greedily gulps down some water, splashing the rest on her face with a happy "Kia!" She thinks nothing tastes better after a good sweat. Emiria and a male attendant applaud enthusiastically, declaring even the way she drinks water is magnificent. Visha basks in the praise, thinking this is why she loves being a princess on this fulfilling day. A sinister voice asks if she's enjoyed herself to the fullest, and Visha freezes in terror at her new tutor. Visha lets out a piercing "Kya!" but the elderly tutor calmly chides her for being discourteous. Realizing it's the monstrous head maid, Visha makes a frantic escape on her bicycle, terrified of being forced to live diligently. The head maid points with grim determination, coolly ordering her attendants to seize the princess. As 2 attendants grab her bicycle, Visha protests her status as the rightful heir, but they inform her she must attend the lessons. The head maid announces an academic assessment will begin today, prompting Visha to throw a tantrum and call her a wrinkled old hag. Unfazed, the head maid laughs heartily, admitting that at her age, wrinkles are only natural. Visha stares in disbelief at the terrifying head maid, who seems completely immune to her insults. Now trapped in the study, Visha wonders how she was caught so quickly, as a small mascot appears with a reminder. Still on her bike, Visha continues to scream in panic, while the head maid tries to calm her with the promise of good news. The head maid offers Visha a way out. Score a perfect 100 on a test, and she'll be exempt from all classes. Visha's tantrum immediately ceases as she asks when the test begins, much to the head maid's satisfaction. Setting the terms, the head maid explains the test has a 1-hour limit with multiple choice questions, which Visha accepts. Visha sits confidently at her desk, thinking questions for a 5-year-old will be laughable since she's already mastered the royal curriculum. Faced with questions on calculus and dialects, Visha strains but confidently declares them easier than blowing her nose. In just 30 minutes, Visha triumphantly slams the finished test down, surprising the head maid. Beaming with pride, Visha holds up her test, absolutely certain of her success. As the head maid begins grading, Visha internally gloats, imagining the old hag will soon regret her clever little trap. Visha dances with a maid she calls Emily, telling her to sound the trumpet as she plans to play for days on end. While Visha celebrates her victory, the head maid reviews the test and lets out a sinister laugh of her own. The head maid recalls the emperor's odd lesson request, realizing that with this result she can proceed with his plan. Pointing dramatically, Visha declares victory is hers and commands the old hag to get lost. The head maid smiles pleasantly, agreeing to return tomorrow once preparations are complete, looking forward to serving her. Presenting the graded test, the head maid calls Visha's perfect score unfortunate, reminding her the deal was for exactly 100 points. The head maid reveals the trick. The exam was out of 101 points, and Visha regrettably answered every question correctly. Gasp! Visha stares at the test in horror, realizing the trap and screaming that the result is completely invalid. The head maid cackles, mocking Visha for stumbling in the same way as Helbatron, proving that blood never lies. Visha throws a fit, demanding the hag's head, but the head maid laughs, reminding her she's protected by the emperor. From the grand palace, Visha's screams about hating her studies echo throughout the grounds. The scene shifts to the princess's palace on a peaceful morning. Visha stands ready for the day, accompanied by a maid carrying a large rucksack on her back. Deciding to treat each day like a field trip, Visha steps outside with the maid to begin her free wandering. A sudden baa startles Visha, interrupting her peaceful morning walk. Stunned, Visha and the maid find themselves face to face with a large, fluffy sheep. The sheep's eyes glow with an intense, fiery red determination. Visha panics, shouting in frustration and wondering how the blasted sheep got into the palace grounds again. A small, cheerful mascot character appears with a promotional message. Two sheep cry out desperately, baaing and creating a commotion. Visha frantically tries to silence the crying sheep, worried they will wake everyone in the palace. One of the sheep suddenly balances perfectly on a large decorated ball, catching Visha's attention with its incredible skill. Visha remembers watching a palace clown perform a similar trick when she was younger. Impressed, Visha notes that the talented sheep must have practiced a lot to master the trick. Unmoved, Visha dismisses the performance and tells a maid named Emily they are leaving, causing the sheep to cry out in protest. The sheep makes a desperate lunge, screaming, "Back!" as it charges forward. Now being nudged by the persistent sheep, Visha yells at the CWAZY sheep, BWAT, and threatens to eat it. The sheep bursts into tears, devastated by Visha's harsh words. Visha orders Emmy to run as she flees from the wailing sheep. Having escaped, Visha and Emmy relax under a tree and enjoy a drink together. Visha beams with a bright smile, ready to head down for lunch after her break. Visha's pleasant day is interrupted by a sudden, jarring announcement demanding attention. An urgent palace-wide alert declares that Lady Kazelnu Leroy will deploy the billion explosion in 1 minute. A blaring siren accompanies the warning for all personnel to prepare for tremors and stay clear of the gates. Two palace officials click on protective goggles as the announcement warns against looking directly at the blast. Visha and Emmy don protective eyewear, with Visha wondering why her auntie is using a battlefield skill. It's speculated that Leroy must have taken a strong liking to someone named Bumgora. Visha cheerfully breaks the fourth wall, offering to explain the current situation to the audience. She explains that challengers have flocked to the palace since the old emperor was ousted, demanding her release. The leader of these challengers is identified as Zephyros, one of the empire's 3 great powers. Zephyros is shown with his hands firmly on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. The narration explains that the Zephyros faction is fiercely loyal to the Kisamalos imperial bloodline. Because of this, they refuse to accept the new emperor, Endekiron, who seized the throne without a blood claim. Zephyros's faction believes the only right course of action is to place Visha, the legitimate heir, on the throne. Visha explains that Leroy using her ultimate attack in this context is a significant political move. The attack is a definitive statement that Leroy, Visha's guardian, has sided with the new emperor Chiron. It also serves as a reflection of Ende's will, showing he doesn't need Visha's influence to rule. As a rumble begins, Visha clarifies the evacuation is just for show. The explosion is purely to send a message. Visha reveals that when Leroy takes a liking to someone, it's actually a terrifying form of threat. After her thorough explanation, Visha and Emily look on thoughtfully. Visha calmly states that the explosion should be starting any second now. A massive, glowing projectile hurtles down from the sky toward the palace gate. The palace gate is blown away in a spectacular and fiery explosion. Visha watches the spectacle with detached amusement, while Emily marvels at Lady Leroy's amazing power. Sipping her drink, Visha decides that since Bumgora is emperor now, he can handle his own problems. From afar, Zephyros adjusts his sunglasses, muttering about the vicious bastards as he realizes their message. TSK. Visha clenches her drink, considering the neutral factions who have yet to move as a bigger problem. She scorns the neutral nobles as chameleons, noting their inaction is the same as siding with the winner. Their picnic is interrupted again by a ba, and they turn to see the persistent sheep has returned. Visha wonders in disbelief if the panting sheep really followed them all the way there. Sighing, Visha tells Emily they're moving to a different tree, and the maid reluctantly agrees. As Emily packs their things, the sheep cries out desperately, watching them prepare to leave again. With a determined look, Visha turns and walks away from the sheep. The abandoned sheep collapses in a fit of dramatic tears. The sheep transforms into a handsome crying man who laments being left behind after all his efforts. On day 2 of skipping her studies, Visha happily runs through the palace with a bucket of dessert. Slurp? She messily devours the food in a way that would make her aunt gasp in horror. Visha plans to go share some ice cream on the mountain with Emily, but is stopped in her tracks. A cheerful boy with pink hair and a box full of supplies stands before her. Visha's eyes widen in shocked recognition. She identifies him as Marshmallow, her former prison buddy from the cell across from hers. He nervously laughs, correcting her that his name is Tarquinius Krishna. Visha dismisses his real name, ordering him to change it to Marshmallow, and he meekly agrees. She asks how he got out of prison, and he explains Lord Ende granted a special pardon to political prisoners. Visha eyes the large box in his hands, and he explains it is for a new job assignment. Visha freezes in terror as the headmaid appears, announcing she's been appointed to oversee the princess's lessons. Her face shadowed with dread, Visha considers it a tragedy to meet a former comrade as a new enemy. Shouting, "Wait!" Visha turns and makes a desperate escape down the hall, leaving Tarquinius stunned. Tarquinius calls out to the fleeing princess, warning her not to walk away just yet. Gulp. He successfully halts her escape by tempting her with the promise of an incredible item. Her interest piqued, Visha turns back to face Tarquinius in the grand palace hallway. Holding her dessert tightly, Visha thinks with grim determination that the fated day has finally come. She recalls the time before Bumgold became her new father, reminding herself that Tarquinius is not to be underestimated. Visha remembers how he once cleverly used the punishment of corrupt ministers as a front to extort bribes. She recalls that the brilliant strategist behind that entire operation was none other than Marshmallow himself. Deciding he's too cunning, Visha prepares to silence him with her secret assassination spoon-throwing technique. A sudden sparkle in Tarquinius's eye suggests he's about to make his move. "Behold this," he exclaims, cheerfully presenting a peculiar pink and green toy from his box. Ta-da! As he makes a small ball float in the air, Visha gasps in pure, wide-eyed amazement. Tarquinius then proposes a wager. If she wins a card game, she gets the toy, and he will cancel her lesson. Visha's face lights up with delight as she eagerly accepts his challenge and asks about the game. He explains it's a simple memory game, but Visha immediately worries she's at a disadvantage against the clever Marshmallow. Thinking fast, Visha proposes a handicap, arguing that since she's younger, she should get 2 turns to his 1. Tarquinius graciously agrees to her terms and says they can play wherever she likes. Victorious, Visha triumphantly orders an attendant to prepare her bedchamber for their game at once. Feeling smug, Visha holds the toy in her mouth like a pipe, confident in her clever plan. Surrounded by flowers, Visha admits to herself that she is feeling exceptionally devious. She lounges in a grand chair like a tiny crime boss, savoring the moment and her perceived victory. Visha grits her teeth in fury, realizing she was tricked into a 2-hour history lesson disguised as a memory game, with Marshmallow correcting her on historical facts with every card flip. Elsewhere, a man reading a book laughs uproariously before commenting on the lovely weather. Wahaha! Another young man bursts into laughter, exclaiming that he too was tricked into a lesson by someone named Choco. The Emperor closes his book, asking Visha if she learned her delinquent attitude from Loroi. "I learned it from you, you bastard," Visha retorts with a forked tongue, but he calmly blames Loroi instead. Fuming, Visha puffs her cheeks and tries to act tough while talking to the toy pipe in her mouth. The Emperor wistfully recalls that the late Empress used to smoke a pipe, then advises Visha not to learn the habit. Visha tells Beomgul to knock it off, but he simply defends himself by stating he's an adult. Adopting an old man mode, Visha lectures him on proper adult behavior before asking why he summoned her. When he doesn't answer, she pointedly asks if he had no real reason for calling her. Visha suddenly demands her lessons be cancelled, then yells for Beomgul to wait as he begins to walk away. Beomgul stops to remind her that she only studies 2 hours a day and is destined to inherit the throne. Visha cheerfully declares she doesn't want to be emperor and suggests he ruin the country, which makes him curiously ask how. After Beomgul dismisses the usual vices, Visha tentatively suggests ruining the nation through a war of conquest. "War, you say?" Beomgul repeats, thoughtfully considering her idea. The conversation unexpectedly shifts into a serious lesson, with Visha explaining how empires collapse from overexpansion. A gleam appears in Beomgul's eye as he realizes he can use her knowledge to his advantage. He reveals he knows she lectured the Brigitte sisters on military tactics and proposes adding military studies to her curriculum. "Suffice my ass!" Visha screams in outrage, realizing she's been completely outmaneuvered. Beomgul calmly suggests they spend the rest of the day having fun, further enraging the screaming princess. He proposes they play house as the Brigitte sisters wanted and asks Visha to assign him a role. Frustrated by his whims, Visha admits she has no idea how to play house since she's never done it before. "No, wait," she thinks, clenching her fist as a cunning idea begins to form. A wicked glint in her eye, Visha vows to give Beomgul a taste of his own medicine and make him regret ever suggesting this game. With newfound determination, Visha raises a finger, ready to assign the roles. Visha declares that Beomgul will be the mother and Choco will be the daughter, to Choco's utter confusion. Visha pressures him by threatening to call the whole thing off, and Choco reluctantly agrees to his role. A maid appears to announce that the playhouse set is now ready for them. "Let's begin." Visha cheers, running excitedly toward the playhouse to start her revenge. Bam Visha kicks the door open, starting the game by yelling at the wretched woman for not greeting her returning husband. With a devious sparkle in her eye, Visha asks if her acting has them surprised or intimidated. Visha recalls a shocking play called War and Love and vows to make Beomgul and Choco experience the same dramatic turmoil she felt watching it. Getting into character, Visha boldly declares that husband and wife are equals. Beomgul, playing his part as the mother, crosses his arms and retorts that he is not her servant. Visha continues her act, demanding to know why the mother didn't come out to greet her. With a stern expression, Beomgul commands her to sit down while he is still being nice. Beomgul crosses his arms, firmly repeating his order for her to sit down immediately. Realizing the tables have turned, Visha thinks with dismay that this isn't how she imagined her revenge. Now seated, Beomgul starts his lecture, informing Visha that, as the mother, he can also earn a living. He lists his accomplishments, from hiring servants to paying taxes, all to ensure her comfort. Flustered, Visha laments that despite being a home, the place lacks any warmth. Beomgul coldly advises that for unconditional love, she should either get a dog or find her parents. Enraged, Visha stomps and yells that if he won't love her, he should get a dog instead. Beomgul calmly lectures that marriage is just a contract that can exist for reasons other than love. Choco suddenly draws his sword, stating his admiration for Byungul's pragmatic thinking as Visha watches in confusion. Announcing he will take the mother for himself, Choco shocks Visha, who mistakenly asks if he means her. Byungul grabs Choco, calling him a brat, and promptly shoots him as a bewildered Visha looks on. The play spirals into chaos as Choco accuses the mother of intercepting the shot, while Byungul claims he is Choco's father. Choco refutes their familial bond, dramatically declaring that Dad liked him first. Byungul aims his gun again, sarcastically asking why Choco isn't thanking him for the protection he's offered. The room erupts into a blur of action as the two men begin to fight fiercely. Visha stares in wide-eyed horror, realizing their improvised story is far more twisted than the original play. As their fight escalates with what look like real weapons, Visha fears they might actually kill each other. Panicked, Visha waves her hands frantically, pleading for Byungul and Choco to stop fighting. She worries that she has just grown attached to her guardians, only to watch them die. Overwhelmed by the chaos, Visha bursts into tears, sobbing that they wouldn't listen to her. A stern woman appears between the combatants, her voice booming as she orders them both to stop. The head maid looks on in fury, demanding to know what is happening. Weeping, Visha cries out to the head maid, who turns in surprise. The head maid demands an explanation from the emperor, as her intimidating shadow falls over the kneeling men. Holding the crying Visha, the head maid explains that it's natural for a young child to be so shocked. She turns to scold Ende, telling him his lack of awareness of his own power has always been his problem. Visha sniffles and asks the head maid if she ever met Byungul when he was young. Her question startles the head maid, prompting Byungul to defensively ask what she means. As Byungul tries to dismiss the topic, the head maid yells, "Nonsense!" leaving Visha wondering how they are connected. Changing the subject, the head maid sternly asks Byungul if he discussed the coronation schedule with the princess. Byungul gives a blunt and simple answer, no. The head maid presses further, asking if he made time just to see the princess. He explains they were playing house, which both he and Choco found fun. Seething with quiet rage, the head maid mutters that she should have killed them back then. Byungul calls her rude and defiantly asks if she intends to cut his neck. He shoves Choco's head to the floor, claiming Visha told him not to kill, earning praise for his obedience. The head maid furiously scolds Byungul for his thoughtless and immature behavior. Visha watches the exchange, certain they've met before and trying to piece together their relationship. Sighing with exhaustion, the head maid states that the schedule ahead is extremely tight. She announces the impending arrival of the special envoy from Astia, requiring immediate preparations. The head maid declares that His Majesty's coronation ceremony must be held the very next day. When told she must also attend, Visha crosses her arms and flatly refuses to go. The head maid reminds Visha that attending is necessary to legitimize the emperor, a concern the princess herself had raised. Visha stubbornly turns away, declaring that children should stay out of politics. The head maid smiles knowingly, questioning Visha's refusal to attend the coronation. She slyly mentions that a visitor named Hisparon is on his way. Visha stands stunned beside the smug head maid, her eyes wide in disbelief. Completely caught off guard by the news, Visha asks, "What?" An illustration introduces the subject of her shock, the legendary young hero Hisparon. A flashback explains that Hisparon was never formally recognized by the Astyages royal family because his mother was a commoner. His legend began at a young age, with his first kill at 14 and suppressing a rebellion at 15. The young hero continued his conquests, expanding the empire's territory to the east. His story concludes tragically, as he sacrificed his life on the battlefield as a blossoming youth. Back in the present, Visha is completely starstruck, blushing with adoration for the hero. When the head maid calls Hisparon a lowly bastard, Visha screams in fury, defending him as a hero. Gazing at a vision of Hisparon, Visha marvels at the idea of meeting him and calculates his age. She flusteredly corrects her math, her cheeks flushed with anticipation. Visha is lost in a daydream, overjoyed at the possibility of meeting her hero in person. She desperately begs the head maid to let her meet him, calling him her lifelong love and flattering her caretaker. Giving 2 enthusiastic thumbs up, Visha continues to lay on the praise thick. The head maid is unimpressed, telling Visha her inability to lie convincingly is a hindrance to becoming a good emperor. Visha throws a tantrum, but the head maid coolly states that refusing to be emperor means she won't get to meet Hesperon. Visha recalls her true ambition, to live a life of leisure after restoring someone named Lord Kisamalos to power. Renewing her pleas, Visha clings to the head maid's skirt, who tells her not to blow her nose on it. A voice off-screen interrupts, noting that he also went to war at 15. Ende appears, demanding Visha marvel at him instead of the other bastard. He continues to belittle Hesperon, insisting he is more worthy of Visha's admiration than some loser. The head maid scoffs at his outburst while Visha watches, completely puzzled. She retells a story of Ende's embarrassing defeat and capture, revealing that Helbatro's mother paid to have the record erased. Flustered, Ende insists the process is what matters and declares he has no desire to speak with her. The head maid ignores him and strikes a deal with Visha, attend the coronation and greet the envoy, and she can meet Hesperon. Visha and Ende both agree in their thoughts that the head maid is a foul-tempered, ugly old hag. Bam! Enraged, the head maid kicks Ende, screaming that his continued existence is an annoyance. Ende blocks her furious barrage, retorting that he finds her just as annoying as he's noted for talking himself into beatings. The head maid stops abruptly, complaining of her aging body before realizing the time. She notes that Helbatro's execution is scheduled for that afternoon, as they look upon a prepared pyre. The head maid instructs Visha to return to the Henyeo palace, but the princess protests. She explains that Visha must stay away from her own father's execution to prevent nasty rumors from spreading. Visha cheerfully defies her, announcing that she's going to watch it anyway. The head maid calls her a vicious bitch, which prompts an indignant Visha to shout back at her. Visha passionately argues that, to her, her father was always trash, and the maid has no right to judge her feelings. Ende steps in to defend Visha, telling the head maid she wouldn't understand since she was never paid to be friends with someone. Visha is shocked to learn Ende was friends with her father, which he confirms he did solely for the money. With a weary sigh, Visha thinks to herself that she would rather die than befriend someone for money. Ende looks away, admitting he had no choice and wishes he had never met him. As the two find common ground, the head maid slams her hands on a nearby coffin in anguish. She furiously blames Ende's influence for causing Helbatro to lose his way. But Ende dodges a flying table while protecting Visha, coolly denying that it's his fault. He remarks on the head maid's temper, while Visha, in his arms, begins to feel she might have been too harsh. Visha's guilt quickly evaporates as she happily decides to just curse her father behind his back from now on. A flashback begins, introducing a young man with dark hair as Ende Chiron. He narrates his story, starting with his ordinary birth into the ducal house of Chiron. While he was a prodigy who mastered advanced sword techniques at 9, he struggled to express emotions properly. Demonstrating his social ineptitude, a young Ende responds to praise by bluntly asking why his peer has fallen behind in lessons. Continuing his story, Ende recalls no problems with a peer until a blonde boy is seen running away as he watches in confusion. Ende narrates his pride in his own ordinariness, but a scene of him effortlessly excelling at sword practice reveals his true talent. Not long after, his world darkens as he reveals that his parents suddenly passed away. He remembers kneeling in the rain before their graves, feeling as if the very ground had vanished from beneath him. As he weeps, a hand suddenly grabs his collar. The devastating truth is revealed. His uncle orchestrated his parents' death, looming over him with a cruel indifference. Despite the tragedy, he notes his childhood wasn't all bad, recalling the day he was introduced as Ende Chiron, a new attendant and friend to a young royal. The young royal, Helbatro, scoffs at the idea of friendship, marking the beginning of Ende's difficult life in the imperial palace. He remembers Helbatro's cruelty as the boy orders a servant to be mercilessly flogged in the dungeon. Ende recalls enduring constant torment for absurd reasons, like being hung from a tree while Helbatro calls him stupid. Thud! It was during a harsh sparring session that Ende finally understood why his uncle had sent him to serve Helbutro. Thud. Thud. Helbutro brutally beats Ende with a wooden sword, showing no mercy. Lying battered on the ground, Ende realizes his uncle's true intention was for him to be killed. But Ende narrates that he did not die, instead finding a moment of peace while recovering under a tree. A rustle is heard nearby as Ende explains his uncle's plan had a critical miscalculation. He realized Helbutro was not only a blockhead but also deeply sensitive, as the young royal guiltily observes his wounds. He describes Helbutro as a strange boy who would eventually grow attached to anyone who stayed by his side. Whenever Ende's injuries were severe, Helbutro would seek him out, awkwardly clearing his throat by his bedside. He recalls Helbutro flusteredly tossing him a healing spirit stone while denying he was worried. Ende's internal thought at the time was that Helbutro was a fool for causing the injury in the first place. Holding the stone, Ende realized he needed to look after the unpleasant bastard, or something bad would surely happen to him. When Ende honestly shared this sentiment, an enraged Helbutro punched him and demanded the spirit stone back. After that, life became easier, with Ende persistently following a frustrated Helbutro, who tells him to stop. But the peace was short-lived, as the fickle Helbutro's attitude toward him changed once again. Ende contrasts his own quick learning with Helbutro's forgetfulness, noting the prince couldn't bridge the intellectual gap between them. Eventually, a distant halberd stopped talking to him altogether. Ende somberly concludes that this was the beginning of the catastrophe. His memory shifts to a letter, recalling when Helbutro's tutor, Tanya Leisto, came to see him. Tanya grabs his arm, pleading for him to return to the duchy. The elderly tutor desperately begs Ende to stay beside Helbutro and protect him, fearing that his current proximity is causing the prince harm. Later, Chief Eunuch Chasun delivered his uncle's official order for him to leave for Sanseong. After leaving the palace, Ende's life became a brutal struggle for survival on the battlefield. Defeated and imprisoned in a dark cell, he lost all hope and waited for death. The cell door creaks open as a guard appears. Ende recounts a rumor that Helbutro had begged the emperor to pay a fortune to ransom him from the enemy. He states that whether true or not, that is how he ultimately survived the battlefield. Arg! Ugh. Upon inheriting his title, Ende took his revenge, brutally purging his treacherous uncle's entire household. He resolved that day to eliminate anyone who could become a future threat. However, there was one cousin he couldn't bring himself to kill. The boy was young but possessed immense potential, posing a mortal threat if Ende were to challenge him directly. Adhering to his principle of avoiding unnecessary risks, Ende sheathes his sword, surviving as he always has. His flashback ends as he explains to a young boy that his revenge was solely because the boy's father killed his parents. Standing before a fiery background, Ende assures the boy he means him no harm and offers to be his guardian. He stands resolute, his hand on his sword, ready to solidify his new position. The boy is stunned by the revelation, exclaiming that Ende's revenge was justified and wishing he had explained sooner. The narration concludes that luckily the boy was simple-minded enough to be won over. Amidst the flames of their fallen house, Ende and the boy shake hands, forging an alliance. Back in his own thoughts, Ende reveals he never intended to hold the title of duke forever. He planned only to act as regent until his deceased brother's young son came of age, watching the child from afar. The flashback concludes with the emperor's death and Helbutro's subsequent coronation, setting the stage for the current events. Ende narrates leaving his cousin in charge of the domain to monitor Helbutro before entering the imperial prison for political criminals. While locked up, Ende recalls that he only ever received bad news about Helbutro. He expected Helbutro's incompetence and obsession with women, but was shocked to learn he was addicted to drugs. He remembers that despite Helbutro's countless rampages, he had never once touched narcotics. Ende wonders how Helbutro acquired the drugs, as psychotropics are strictly banned in the empire. He speculates they came from Lorowe, a foreign nation that uses drugs to boost soldier morale. A sudden thought strikes him as he remembers who Helbutro married. Recalling Helbutro's wedding, Ende wonders if the empress was the one who supplied the drugs. He dismisses the idea since the Empress is dead, considering if another person from Lorui was involved. Unable to solve the mystery, he remembers Madame Listo's request and knew he couldn't avoid Helbutro. His solitude is broken when Helbutro's daughter arrives in the next cell, loudly complaining about prison. A smirk spreads across his face as he comes to a realization. Thinking anyone would feel like talking to her, he sends his fist flying toward the wall. Bam! He shatters the wall between their cells, leaving a startled Visha speechless. To his surprise, Visha turns out to be a funny child, happily chatting about tasty strawberries in her cozy cell. Musing that she's an even bigger fool than her father, he passes her a basket for the strawberries and feels a pang of sadness when she promises to return. His eyes narrow as he thinks to himself that the little fool came right back. She returned shortly after being beaten by the big fool, looking bruised and shaken. Enraged, Ende immediately went to confront Helbutro at the palace that night. He grabs Helbutro by the throat, intending only to warn him for harming a child. Finding Helbutro drugged and delirious, mistaking him for the Empress, Ende furiously demands he snap out of it. After beating Helbutro to within an inch of his life, Ende calmly walks back to his cell. That night, Ende dreams of his household god, Chiron, appearing before him in a blaze of glory. Ende explains that while Chiron is usually gentle, his anger now causes him to appear in his dreams and beat him senseless. Punch. Chiron attacks him for not playing nicely with his friend, just as he did when Ende was first expelled from the palace. He recalls another beating after purging his uncle Milga, with Chiron yelling he should have killed someone worth avenging. As Chiron delivers a powerful kick, Ende thinks that this time, he's done nothing to deserve it. He hits the ground hard, bracing for impact. Ende demands to know why he's being hit, and Chiron reveals a stunning truth. Ende has gone back 16 years in time. Chiron explains that in the future, Ende had Kisomalos' last heir torn apart. The god of Kisomalos paid a god of time a heavy price to turn back the clock. Ende correctly guesses Chiron was the one who helped, earning a compliment for his sharp mind. Chiron admits he shared his power out of a sense of responsibility, causing his own divine rank to fall. As Ende processes that he ruined a divine heir, Chiron warns him that the same price must be paid again in 16 years. The god furiously blames Ende for the entire situation and demands he take responsibility. Ende nonchalantly replies that if the heir died, they probably had it coming. Enraged, Chiron grabs him, roaring that the heir is the sleeping child in the next cell and that he must take responsibility. He throws a punch, warning Ende to shoulder the karma or live a miserable existence. Waking from the dream, Ende struggles to catch his breath. He looks at the sleeping Visha, wondering if the innocent fool will truly become the trash destined for dismemberment. Gently pulling the blanket over her, he contemplates how he should treat her from now on. He sees the cute child before him but flashes forward to a vision of a malevolent Visha, a worthless tyrant who will ruin the country. Musing on the word responsibility, he remembers Helbutro was a decent person before meeting Roroi. With Helbutro lost to drugs, Ende realizes that protecting Visha is the only way to preserve the Kisomalos bloodline. He steels himself, deciding that his time for repentance is not yet over. He resolves to remain in prison until his nephew is an adult, ignoring the boy's frantic pleas to stay away. Though he pities Visha, he feels he has no choice but to coldly turn away to keep a promise to himself. Steeling his resolve, he declares that he is 3.7 billion times more confident in his ability to raise her than Helbutro ever was. Ende brings Visha a meal, but internally reminds himself not to sympathize with the trash she's destined to become. Despite his resolve, Ende admits to himself that Visha is undeniably cute, just like her father Helbutro was. He wonders if he should just raise her himself, confident he would do a far better job. But while Ende was still debating, Visha caused a major incident. Visha innocently places her hand on his and declares she forgives his sins, shocking Ende to his core. A divine mark appears on his chest as he realizes she has forgiven his sins in the name of the true Kisomalos bloodline. He internally scoffs at her recklessness for forgiving sins so easily, thinking she's naive. In a flash of insight, Ende decides to interpret her forgiveness as official permission to become her guardian. With nothing left to hold him back, he immediately springs into action. After studying every parenting book he could find, Ende informs his stunned cousin that they will be striking the imperial palace with an elite unit. Visha formally accepts him, standing on her throne and appointing Ende as her dad, ordering him to raise her well. Realizing the importance of a father's role, Ende commits to raising Visha with extra devotion as her sole guardian. He recalls playing with Visha with all his effort, though his intense methods often made her burst into tears. A horrified Madame Listo holds the wailing Visha, appalled by his parenting. This earned him a severe scolding from Madame Listo, a scene reminiscent of his own youth. Holding the sleeping child, Ende realizes she needs pets and friends to grow up properly. He remembers her interest in war and decides that letting her observe a battlefield might be a good experience for her. With Vishunate's birthday approaching, he realizes the timing is perfect for a special outing. Holding her close, Ende vows that as her new dad, he will personally provide everything for her. On the day of the imperial coronation, a proclamation is made in the name of Vishunate Roroi Kisamalos. Vishunate proudly proclaims that Ende Kiron will act as emperor in her stead until she comes of age. To legitimize his rule, she personally places the crown on his head, making it clear to all factions that his reign is temporary. The narration notes that, unsurprisingly, many of the nobles were not thrilled with this development. They murmur amongst themselves about burning the former emperor at the stake just the day before. The nobles complain that holding a coronation so soon looks bad, unaware that the idea for the burning came from Vishunate herself. She internally scoffs at the notion she would cry for her dead father. In fact, she claims she fulfilled her daughterly duty by giving him painkillers to ensure he didn't suffer. With a smirk, she thinks to herself that the coronation itself is not what truly matters. Kicking Ende off the throne with a triumphant Kieyahaho, she declares the ceremony is over and he can leave. She then turns and excitedly calls for Madame Listo, who looks on wearily. With a happy cry, Vishunati runs towards her with arms wide open. Posing proudly, she asks if she can finally meet Lord Hisferon now that the coronation is done. Winking at Madame Listo, she fishes for compliments, asking if hard-working Vishunata isn't just adorable. Tanya retorts that she's disgusting, prompting Vishunata to demand at least a little respect. Tanya reluctantly agrees to call the outer palace, questioning if some lowborn would dare refuse her. HMPH Vishunata furiously puffs out her cheeks, insisting that Lord Hisferon is not a lowborn. As Tanya shouts at her for speaking nonsense, Vishwanath decides to return to her own palace. She runs excitedly down the hall, thrilled at the prospect of finally meeting Lord Hisferon. Kiahu! A maid announces Lord Hisferon's arrival, and Vishunata shrieks with delight. A mysterious man with dark hair appears at the doorway. The man, Lord Hisferon, steps into the light, revealing a somber expression and formal attire. She is immediately captivated by his dark, gloomy demeanor and dead eyes, thinking he's incredibly cool. Wham! In her excitement to greet him, she trips and falls flat on her face. A concerned Lord Hisferon rushes forward, asking if she is all right. She quickly scrambles up, pretending everything is perfectly fine. Attempting a formal curtsy, she introduces herself as Vishunata to the young hero. Her composure breaks as a drop of blood falls from her nose. The maid and Hisferon watch in stunned silence, a mix of concern and awkwardness on their faces. Vishwanath is mortified, realizing she completely screwed up their first meeting. Later, she sits awkwardly on the sofa, thanking him for giving her a handkerchief after her embarrassing display. Dazzled, Vishunate calls Hisferon cool and kind, eagerly asking the young hero for his autograph. Hisferon humbly insists that he is not someone worthy of Her Highness's respect. Dismissing his words as amusing nonsense, Vishunate beams at him. A maid rushes in with a glowing healing spirit stone, but Vishunati waves her off, insisting she's fine. Realizing the stone should be enough to heal her shallow scrape, she apologizes for the fuss. Hisferon reveals the healing power was used on him instead. showing his heavily bruised arm. Gasp! Vishwanatha is horrified, angrily questioning if the emperor even distributes healing stones to the army. In a chibi thought bubble, she continues to rant about the emperor's failure to supply healing stones as Hisvaran listens. He explains his background is the reason for his mistreatment, which only fuels her fury against the shabby treatment of her hero. She flashes to a tragic vision of Hisvaran dying alone and overworked in the barracks at only 20 years old. Slam! She slams her teacup down, declaring that a mere spirit stone is not enough for a 15-year-old. Leaping to her feet, Vishwanatha shouts for Amiri to bring her a divine healing crystal immediately. Amiri cries that the palace budget cannot afford it, while Hisvaran waves his hands, saying he's fine. Vishwanath declares that it's fine, and that they will simply eat watery meat soup starting tomorrow. She firmly demands the crystal again, and a teary-eyed Amiri is moved by her vast kindness. The scene transitions to the Grand Palace the following morning. Thwack! A spoon is dropped in disgust. Bam! Vishwanath slams her hands on the table, furiously demanding how she is supposed to live on such a meager meal. Amiri kneels and apologizes, explaining that yesterday's expense completely depleted their budget, leaving them with only potatoes. In a flashback, a smiling Vishwanatha gives a nervous Hisvaran a healing artifact, telling him to take it or become a corpse. She internally celebrates getting his autograph on her handkerchief as a result of her generosity. Seeing her gaunt maids, she resolves that she cannot let them starve because of what she did. With a new determination, she decides she must go see her papa. She performs a full-body prostration on the floor before a surprised Ende. Looking down, Ende crosses his arms and asks what she thinks she's doing. She cheerfully explains it's the highest level bow she can perform while begging him to increase her palace's budget. Ende questions if she's truly the princess after giving away a divine healing crystal to Hisvaran. Beaming, she declares that she is his one and only precious daughter. As he internally scoffs at her nerve, she clings to his leg, proclaiming that her shamelessness is her pride. Ende explains he has already dealt with the Empress and collected damages, so increasing her budget is not a problem. He lifts the cheering Vishwanatha into the air. Holding her, he adds that there is a condition, and she curiously asks what it is. He forbids her from skipping lessons and announces renovations to her palace, causing her to cry out in dismay. She demands a new toy catalog with a wide variety, and he agrees, though she denies falling for his trick. Deciding to strike while the iron is hot, Ende carries a compliant Vishwanatha away to begin construction immediately. She puffs her cheeks, assuming the renovations will just be some minor building repairs. Yeah. She screams in terror at the sight of her newly renovated room. She furiously demands to know what the round, hideous new furniture is and where her high-class rosewood furniture has gone. Ende reminds her that she's the one who happily accepted the deal. Whack-pointing accusingly, she retorts that the furniture is not better and that she doesn't have any friends to use it with. He calmly informs her that he's following Helbetro's precedent and has assigned her a paid friend to play with. He hands her a document, remarking that Helbetro's presence didn't improve her social skills much. Ende thinks to himself that he was a special case, and he wants to avoid the same outcome with her. He presents the solution with a dramatic, sparkling flourish. Reading the document, she starts to complain about the commoner he's assigned her, when a loud "me" interrupts. A fluffy sheepdoll bounces into the room, bleating that it's her descendants' fault it keeps returning. Grr. The sheepdoll lunges at her, angrily bleating that it told her it needed to acquire talented people. The furious doll shreds the document as a stunned Vishwanatha wonders if sheep can get rabies. Ende casually mentions that was a copy and the original's in his office, shocking the sheep into silence. Kneeling with the document, he presents the wide-eyed sheepdoll to Vishwanatha, asking what she thinks of this child. He shows her a portrait of a girl with green hair and glasses, noting she's from the Achilles family and is 2 years older than her. Vishwanath eagerly points at the portrait, while the sheepdoll excitedly bleats that an Achilles must be an excellent talent. Ende agrees to the choice and then holds up a white collar, adding that there is more to his plan. Holding a leash now attached to a smirking sheepdoll, He explains that a companion animal is also needed for her emotional development. He places the leash in a very confused Vishunate's hands, instructing her to raise it well. With a charming wink, Ende tells Visha that she can even give her new pet a name. He promptly turns to leave, announcing that he's busy with work, leaving a trembling Vishunate behind him, now both collared and leashed. A furious Vishunate and the sheepdoll scream in unified, humiliating rage. She yells across the palace grounds that she just wants a friend, not a crazy sheep, as the doll yells back that it doesn't want to be raised either. Elsewhere, the girl from the portrait looks out her window while reading a book, acknowledging her duty to serve Vishunate as a study companion. Flipping through the book, she scowls, thinking of Vishunate as the one who will corrupt her into a clown.